Hello, everyone. I am here today with Rania Aziz, a Sudanese activist who has been deeply involved in that country's transformative landscape for many years. She played a leadership role, for example, in the 2018 revolution as a member of the highly influential Sudanese Professional Association. She is also the founder of Interconnect Initiative, a grassroots movement that helps to build psychological resilience for activists, as well as storytelling, so that human rights defenders can take ownership of their own narratives. For over 20 months, two of Sudan's most powerful generals have viciously competed for territory in a country still reeling from decades of unrestrained violence and impunity. As we sit here today, tens of thousands of people have been killed and over 8 million more have been internally displaced, making Sudan home to the largest internal displacement crisis in the world. More than 30 million people, over half of them children, are in urgent need of humanitarian aid. And just last week, the outgoing Biden administration declared that the RSF militia had committed genocide. In short, almost 2 years into this war, Sudan is facing anarchy, famine, genocide, and a largely resonant ambivalence from the world. Rania, there's perhaps no one better place to discuss these important issues, how Sudan has reached this point, and what we should be paying attention to going forward. So, sincere thanks for taking the time to speak with me and for really helping to inform our audience. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for inviting me to speak on your platform. And as I mentioned to you, we need to occupy more spaces and we need to come more on different platforms to speak about Sudan and to push forward for peace talks.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for being here today. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I really do appreciate it. And, just jumping right in, I think to start off, for those who track Sudan know full well, it's a very complex and often shifting situation, as we've even seen in the past week. And as I mentioned at the outset, despite Sudan being home to the world's most dire humanitarian crisis, few people really grasp or fully understand this reality. And of course, this might help explain the lack of attention and actions as well as funding to address the overlapping crises there. So, if you could, in a nutshell, I know this is difficult, but perhaps give us the essential background of the war and help our audience make sense of how we got to this point. How did we get here?
How did we get here? Okay, well, to start with, as you said, it is the largest humanitarian crisis with invisible to so little attention and global efforts to stop the war and to cease fire. The situation is completely dire. The numbers you've mentioned are correct, but it's even much more than that. It's a man-made famine of more than 700,000 people affected by the famine, mainly in Darfur, but other regions of Sudan also are suffering from acute hunger. We're approaching the third year. The war started in April 2023, so we're approaching the third year in a couple of months, and 80% of the hospitals are closed, no access to health services. Reports of rape cases and reports of sexual violence are coming out of the countries, reports of women taking their own lives to prevent or to fearing rape and to protect themselves. The situation is completely dire on every and each front. How did we get here? This will take us back to how all this started. The RSF, led by Hemeti, and the Sudanese armed forces came into a power sharing deal in 2019. They formed a front called the Transitional Military Council, and the Transitional Military Council negotiated with the civilian front, the FFC, to come to a power sharing deal. After a successful revolution, a successful nonviolent women and youth-led revolution that toppled the Bashir regime. They came to power together as one front, and during this time, the RSF leader Hemeti started building an economic empire around gold and venturing into other small businesses as well. And of course, having economic interest, started getting revenue. The power sharing deal became imbalanced, so he wanted to gain more power. The conflict started between the two of them during the negotiation within the trilateral mechanism with the African Union and with led by UNITAS back then. And the conflict started around merging the RSF troops within within the Sudanese army. The conflict soon escalated to a full-blown war backed by different regional allies. The RSF, they have their allies. The SAF have their allies as well. This is how the war started. How we got here today is for so many reasons. We are where we are today because of the lack of interest from the international community to push for ceasefire and to push for peace talks, because of the funding and the support the RSF are getting. I mean, this war is economically and financially draining for the both parties. And hadn't been for the support and the fund they're getting from different backers and different allies within the region, they wouldn't have managed to continue the war until date. So second reason is the support, the fund that mainly the RSF are getting from their backers. Third reason is we don't have the civilian-led front that leading the peace talk or trying to negotiate to push for peace talk and for ceasefire is inefficient, and also they don't have. They're seen as impartial by the Sudanese people, and they're perceived as being biased by the Sudanese people, and they don't really have a strong leverage to push the peace talks. So there is not laziness, but there is a lack of interest in stopping the war. This is why we're here today. If there is a genuine interest and will to push for peace talks, and of course, neither of the two parties are engaged in any meaningful talks or negotiation, the RSF or SAF. Yeah, this is how we are here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's super helpful for me, and I'm sure for those who will be listening into this. And just to pick up on some of the issues you raised and pull on those threads a bit. As we know, last Tuesday, Washington declared that the RSF militia and its allies, to which you've referenced, have committed genocide by attacking and murdering civilians. They noted the systematic elimination of men and boys on the basis of their ethnicity, and as well as targeting women and young girls on an ethnic basis, once again, for brutal sexual violence, which you've also alluded to. So that designation is a big deal, right? So I wanted to ask you what impact that genocide determination might have on the warring factions in Sudan, and relatedly, how could that move more potentially affect those peace efforts that you've mentioned, those efforts that have been undertaken thus far? So a two-part question: how might that determination affect the warring factions, and how might it also affect these peace efforts that seem to be really stalled at this point?
Okay, I think it's a very important step towards justice and accountability. And not only it's important for justice and accountability, and also for a recognition for the victim that the world is acknowledging that the suffering of the people of Darfur and the genocide in Darfur. And the sanctions were not only imposed on Hemeti, but it's on Hemeti and 12 of his companies. And those companies are all UAE-based companies. So it's important step towards justice and accountability. It also sends a strong message to the backers of the RSF that there might be a future consequences if they continue backing the RSF. And it also it kills the narrative. Like the RSF, when they came into the fight, they were selling the narrative through their propaganda campaigns, through the misinformation and disinformation. And the message that they were trying to spread is that they are pro-democracy and it's a fight against the Islamists. So that's killed that narrative. This narrative is no longer there. They are proven to be war criminals, and they have committed atrocities and war crimes against the Sudanese people. So this definitely killed the narrative. On one side, this is good, but this is not a step forward towards peace, because Hemeti has everything to lose. This is more of a family business. Him and his brothers are basically backed by other regional allies, are running this business, very unlike SAF. So they have everything to lose. They have everything to lose. So it's not going to bring us one step towards peace, closer to peace. or to negotiation table. In fact, I think it's the opposite. They will try to gain more on the ground. And also we have the history of al-Bashir. I mean, the ICC, or we have the history of al-Bashir and 9 or 11 of his prominent party figures being wanted by the ICC. And nothing had happened. Justice was never served. And the Janjaweed, the RSF, the Janjaweed back then, the RSF now, the branding, the new branding of the RSF, were also involved in the war crimes in Darfur. So I think it's important for justice, but I don't think it will bring us any step forwards close to peace talk. The only way that the RSF will be pushed to come to negotiation or to peace talk if they stop getting funds and supplies from their allies in the region.
Yeah, it's a super important point. And actually, really quick follow-up. And I was struck by something when you were talking, and it was something I was thinking about this week. So really quickly, if you could, for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, in this analysis, it's been really striking to see how active some leaders on the African continent have been in taking a moral stance against the atrocities being committed against the Palestinians, right? South Africa, for example, took a very hard moral stance on this, leading the charge at the UN and other international venues, and rightfully so. But you also noted in some of your opening remarks the sort of widespread apathy on the situation in Sudan. And to me, that would certainly include African countries and African leaders. Why is that the case? Why have African leaders, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing something, been so outspoken on issues happening in Israel, Palestine, and not so much on Sudan? What explains that? Is it hypocrisy? What is it? How can we unpack this?
There are so many things to discuss here, so many elements. Well, one, I mean, we're all still suffering a post-colonial struggle in the continent. And there isn't really, and also we come back to Sudan. We had 30 years of complete isolation during the Bashir regime. We haven't. I mean, if we think of cultural exchange, if we think of activists coming together, if we think of Pan-African movements, we really haven't had a big chance as Sudanese, being under 30 years of oppressive regime, to mix and mingle with our peers from the continent. There is so little we know about the continent. We're building that. I mean, seeing the movements now and seeing how the movements are connected. Second point is the Israel-Palestinian conflict has been around for like 60 years plus now. So there is so much information and narrative about it. The atrocities are clear. There are videos coming out, images. Very unlike Sudan now, very little is coming out of Sudan. So we don't really see the struggle, the day-to-day struggle, which is also very dangerous because Sudan became numbers now. We just did like 11 million internally displaced people. 11 million is the size of, not the size, it's the population of Sweden. Sweden is less than that. Sweden is 10.8 million. But when we turn the crisis and the struggle and the tragedy into numbers, people don't really relate much because we don't see, we're just reading. So that's the second thing, the post-colonial struggle, the nature of the conflict in Palestine and with Israel, the occupation. We don't have enough ties. We don't know much about the continent. Three, some of the African countries are also backed by the regional allies that are backing Hemeti as well. So, I mean, there's so much happening here, the geopolitics, the change in the geopolitics in the region. Some actors and players were like known as the go-to regional players in Africa and in the Middle East. This has changed with the Gulf allies coming in and having ties with Israel and ties with the US. There is so much to dissect here. There's so much. It's a big debate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And lastly, I have to ask you, because I'm sitting here not too far away from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., in less than a week from today, as you know. Donald Trump will be sworn in as the US president once again. So I have to ask that, in light of this reality, how do you see US Africa policy potentially changing for better or for worse, specifically with regards to Sudan and Washington's often feckless and flawed posture towards the ongoing war in your country? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, First, good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you. We need it.
I'm not really optimistic for so many reasons. I mean, Trump's administration foreign policy often emphasized transactional relationships, and it always prioritized the US interest and the economic gains. Their allies in the Middle East are usually the Gulf allies. I mean, that's been the case during his first administration, so I'm not really expecting much. If we look into when during Trump's administration, Sudan was removed from the terrorist and sanctions list, and that came in transaction to normalize ties with Israel. So it's clearly it's a very transactional relationship, unless the U.S. interest changes. I don't think, or I don't see the Trump administration will push for peace talks and stability in Sudan. Yeah, unless something changes. Also, it's not clear whether they would appoint a special envoy for Sudan or not. That's also not clear because that will also play a role in the agenda, in the administration agenda. Yeah, I don't think Sudan might be of top priority, and unless the interests have changed.
Right. Well, as we're coming to a close here, I know I fully recognize that this has been a really heavy conversation. So what I want to do before we close is if you could maybe leave us on a positive or hopeful note. Because I know so much of your work is building strength and resilience for human rights defenders in Sudan and elsewhere, and allowing them and building capacity for them to tell their own stories and build their own narratives. So if you could, give us a glimmer of hope going forward. What do you see? Is there anything that gives you hope going forward that, the mass suffering taking place in your country can somehow come to an end? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, as you said, the positive note is the Sudanese people are very resilient. It's amazing to see this resilience all the time. Yes, we need support, we need intervention, but we did not stop calling for a ceasefire, pushing for peace talks, occupying the spaces to talk about Sudan. That's on one side, on the advocacy and the soft diplomacy side. On the grassroots side, the burden of the war is on the shoulder of the community. I mean, look at the resistance committees, how they change automatically and very fast from resistance committees to emergency committees, responding to the day-to-day needs of those who are still in the war zone, taking the heavy lift of building humanitarian corridors. Until date, we don't have humanitarian corridors, so we're relying heavily and solely on the emergency committees. So this is a glimpse of hope that the Sudanese people are still resilient, are still fighting for peace, are still not taking part in the conflict. Of course, there are here and there stories here and there, but this is a hope. And also, also hopefully the allies and the backers of the RSF and SAF will stop, and they should understand that this is a very short-sighted approach if they think that the gain of the war will outweigh the gain that they could get through peace. I mean, they're interested in gold, agriculture, access to the Nile water, Red Sea. Peace talks can bring this. Peace can definitely, through bilateral agreement, through investment, the gain is bigger. So there is hope. There's always hope. We never give up.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. And thank you for allowing us to end on a somewhat positive note. And thank you so much, Rania, for taking the time to speak with me today. I can definitely speak on behalf of our team here at the Resistance Bureau. We appreciate all that you've been doing over the years, really going back a long time to shed light on the situation in Sudan and helping to inform audiences and what can be done to end the human suffering taking place there. So our team, and certainly me, we wish you continued strength and solidarity, and we look forward to future conversations with you. And take good care in the meantime, and please be safe in all that you do.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and thank you, team.
Thank you.